Not
She's here. She's here.
Hey, great seeing you again.
Hello from Montreal.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, hello.
I've
How
been
are
up
you
all,
doing?
Tell me afterwards,
Yeah.
no question.
so now I'm having breakfast.
Oh, you're not
Good morning.
I found something actually.
Morning.
Well, good.
It's afternoon here.
Miri, are you here?
Raya,
Yes.
תזכרי לעשות לי co-host, כך שאני יכול להשתמש בשקפים שלי.
Just that I'm waiting. Here is Miri.
Yeah, I will do it.
Yes,
Okay.
good.
Hurrah.
So let's start with Erin first. We can already start. We have still 2 minutes. So can you share?
Yes, I think so.
Yes,
Yes.
please do so. Good. Good.
Mary, I'm not sure I have co-host permission.
Yeah, you. Inat?
Yeah.
Let me check it again.
We see your slides.
Yes, we do.
Okay, just let me know when.
Okay, so I think we can start.
Okay, to
You're
that.
still a minute early.
What?
You're still 1 minute early.
1 minute. 1 minute for the introduction.
Actually, as we are 1 minute early or late, you said. Yeah, Raya, would you be sharing the poster?
Yes, yes. Miri will help us to do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I will show it.
Yes.
Don't worry.
Okay, so
Thank
first
you.
of all, welcome to the session Creative Tools in Writing. I'm really looking forward to this session. I think it will be very interesting. My name is Raya Stoller. I'm the head of the English department at Himdata College of Education, and I'm very pleased to chair this session. We have 3 presentations and 1 poster, and we'll have several minutes in the end of the session for to take questions. So please write your questions in the chat, and by the end of the session, I will collect all the questions. Our first speaker is Dr. Irene Yosebashvili from the English department at the David Yelin Academic College of Education in Jerusalem. And this is the title of her presentation. Yes, you are welcome.
Okay. My talk today is about a tool that helps students to show what they know. I teach English literature in Israel, and I want my students to be able to make connections with the texts that we read and to make connections between the texts and their own experiences, their own needs. I want them to be able to use the texts to meet their own goals and their own purposes. But I had a problem. Maybe it's a problem some of you know as well. I would assign students to read a text, give them an academic type of task to complete, writing a short paper, answering questions, and what did they do? They would Google, and then immediately the work was no longer their own work. It was no longer coming from them. So I started to look for different kinds of tools, specifically trying to avoid the problem of students losing their way and having to take their information from someone else instead of from their own understanding. In our curriculum here in Israel, we talk about mediating texts. And this is the way that we want students to relate to what they read. So for example, if you read a book and you found out that your best friend had just read the same book, would you talk to her about the way the protagonist foreshadows the theme of death with the choice of the last name? Probably not, right? You might talk about what you liked, how you felt connected to the characters. Maybe you would put the book down and run to the kitchen to make the chocolate cake that the protagonist eats. In other words, it would be something of your own. This is what we mean by mediating texts. It's a way of relating to what you've read that is useful to you. So moving from the text through yourself to another product, something creative, something technical, maybe another text, not necessarily. And through that, having a better understanding of the text that you began with. So the assignment that I want to show you today is part of a total redesign of my Introduction to Literature course on the basis of this shift towards mediating texts. It's really a movement away from a more academic framework, from covering the canon, from giving students academic writing tasks. When I was in school, we used to do what we called explication du texte, which was very formal, very rigid, very specific. And it really had nothing to do with us. It had to do with trying to understand what the correct way of reading a text was. So I'm shifting away from that and more towards a kind of relationship with reading that builds language skills, not just receptive skills, but also productive skills, and that helps students to make something from what they've read. So what is a one-pager assignment? It is what it sounds like. It's one page. It's composed of both image and text. And its purpose is to really respond to something that the students have read, whether it's a poem, a story, a play. It can also be informational text, an essay, a newspaper article. As long as the students are able to show what they have understood from the text. They can use any materials. It can be high-tech or low-tech. It can be handmade or using pre-made materials like photographs or collage. Really, almost anything goes. So I'll show you a few examples of one-pagers that my students have made. This is the first one. In the course, we read some poems by what are called the Metaphysical Poets. So these are poets from different time periods, different genres, English, American, very different range of poets, all of which have one thing in common. These are usually short poems, and they are always organized around a key central image. Often we talk about it as a conceit, an image that is not just dominant in the poem, but often disturbing, surprising, hard to understand. Usually we think of it as an image that was pushed just a little bit too far. So it makes a great topic for a one-pager because it's very visual by nature, and it's a manageable amount of text. So the image that you're seeing on the left, this is one of my students' projects. It's based on the poem called I Felt a Funeral in My Brain by Emily Dickinson. I'm sure some of you know the poem. If you don't, you can get a very good idea of it just from looking at her assignment. So you see she's used a mix of elements here. She has some writing. This is one stanza of the poem. She has some collaged elements and some hand-drawn elements. And she has even intervened a little bit in the, I guess we could call it the font style of the writing to express what she thinks is happening in the poem. So despite the fact that there's a lot going on here, it's also very coherent. The one-pager focuses on one stanza of the poem, which is what she's written at the top there. And it shows us how she has drawn out of that stanza all of the key images. We have the drum, the heartbeat, the brain. I can see just by looking at her page that she has understood Emily Dickinson's conceit. But that's not where she stops. The figure in red inside the head is not from the poem. And neither is the television static at the bottom. I wonder what Emily Dickinson would make of that. But those two elements are totally harmonious with the rest of the page and with the poem. Not just in the visual vocabulary of the page, but also in the meaning. And what I see that the student has done here is taken things from her reality, from her visual vocabulary, from her experience of the world, and incorporated them into what Emily Dickinson said 150 years ago. So this shows me that the student has made it her own. She has incorporated it in a way that shows not just a deep understanding of what she's read, but some kind of application to herself as a reader.
Erin, 2 more minutes.
Okay, I'll leave this one here. You can come back to it if you have more time, but in the interest of time, I'll show you one more example. This is another Emily Dickinson poem called The Poet's Light But Lamps. And this poem has in it an image of a lens and says that the poet is like a lens that refracts light past herself and into the future, into other ages and other moments in history. So the student has used that lens image to connect Emily Dickinson to Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's up here, and on the right-hand side to Sylvia Plath. What's amazing to me here is that those are not authors that we studied in the course. Those are great connections to Emily Dickinson, and it's very persuasive to me that there's a connection, there's an inheritance there. But this is something the student brought on his own. In other words, it's something he knows that I didn't know he knows, that I didn't ask him about, but that he was able to show me because he had a task, a tool that was flexible enough to bring in what his larger synthesis of Emily Dickinson was, where he places her in his total understanding of English literature. So the one pager, as we've seen here, it's something you can do with any text, any subject matter. It could work in math, it could work in history, it could work in science. Any materials, with technology, without technology. But the key here is that it is something that is the student's own work. It shows us what they've understood and what value it has for them, and not only for us and for other kinds of questions that we would like to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What an interesting talk. Thank you, Erin. If there are any questions, we will take them later by the end of the session. And now I'm really delighted to introduce Professor Emeritus Raymond Boxman from School of Electrical Engineering, Tel Aviv University. The list is very long, but since we have only 10 minutes, I won't read all the list. Professor Raymond. You have to unmute yourself.
He's muted.
Click on the microphone.
We can't hear you. You have to click on the icon of the microphone. There is a...
Click on the microphone at the bottom of the page, of the screen.
Okay, found it.
Oh, good.
Sorry.
Great.
Okay, surprisingly enough, there's actually a direct connection between Erin's presentation and mine, because both have to do with conveying a story through figures, through pictures, and words are just not enough. In scientific research reports, a major part of the story is in fact conveyed by way of tables and figures. And the problem is that these should be designed to tell the scientific story, and there really isn't anyone to teach students to do it but us. The figures and text have to be coordinated so that they're telling the same story, and the writers have to use best practices to convey the story most effectively and efficiently. An awful lot of the results in scientific research reports are numerical in one way or another. These should be presented in tables if the exact value is the main point. or in a graph if a trend or comparison is the main point. And when we present it in a graph, then the result should be on the vertical or y-axis, and the most important experimental variable should be on the horizontal or x-axis. Here's an example showing the trend of resistance as a function of temperature using a line graph, and showing a comparison between tensile strength of various materials using a bar graph. Now, the text is presented in the form of three kinds of sentences that relate to the figure: the location sentence, the presentation sentence, and comment sentence. These can be more than one sentence. Usually several will be required for a presentation. The presentation sentence is the biggest challenge for students. It should summarize what is actually seen in the figure, whereas interpretations can come later. It should follow what I call blind man's rule. It should be written so that if the paper was being read to a blind person, he could get the figure just from what is written in the P sentence. And another criteria which is helpful for us as teachers in order to judge whether the P sentence is doing its job or not is that if it is well written, it should allow the reader to approximately reproduce the figure. You should actually be able to draw the figure from the P sentence. Now, sometimes it doesn't work that way. We get a paper where this is not the case. And there are two ways of handling it. The one is you just write more text. But more often than not, when this occurs, it's probably because it was the wrong figure. The writer actually wrote the scientific story in the P sentence, but the figure did not convey the story. Let me illustrate this with an example, actually from one of my students' exercises. Here we show the result of applying a control mechanism on some kind of valve. And it shows valve position as a function of time. This is what the student wrote in his P sentence. The Cascade-Smith algorithm and control had shorter response time, shorter regulation time, and larger overshoot than the Cascade PID control. And the problem is that here in the figure, we have nothing that is labeled as response time, nor regulation time, nor overshoot. An expert reader, an expert in the field, can figure it out and can extract that data from this figure, but it ain't here. Now, one way of fixing it would be to simply add a sentence that really describes y as a function of x. Here it is. The valve opening in both cases started at the fully open position of 35.25 millimeters. That's right here. And then decreased to a low value. That's here and here. And then increased approximately to the steady state value of 34 millimeters. That's here. And then you can go on to give this interpretation of extracting various data from here. But if the student didn't bother to tell us that story of y as a function of x, it's probably not important. In this case, indeed, it's not important. Every control system would have these features. What's really needed is a direct comparison between the PID and Smith controls for these three criteria that he mentioned, namely response time, regulation time, and overshoot. Here you can see that the PID is bigger in terms of the various times, but less in terms of the overshoot. This problem follows from two maladies which I think are very common in science and engineering writers. One malady is what I call instrumentitis. This is excessive love and reliance on favorite instruments. I'm an electrical engineer and I love my oscilloscope. But the oscilloscope does not always produce the scientific story that we're trying to tell. The other malady I call excellitis. It's an over-reliance on Excel and its default options to produce graphs which are not really optimal. We have to be on the lookout for these maladies and to help our students overcome them. There's a couple of other, what I consider to be best practices in terms of figures. First of all, the features in the figure should always be labeled directly on the figure. For example, here, we indicate PID and Smith right here on the figure, rather than having symbols which have to go and look for their explanation, either in a legend or in a caption, or worse, in the body text. If we have a photograph or micrograph, there must be something to indicate scale. Saying that this is times 34,000 is inadequate because the writer does not control the size of the print, or these days, the size that it will appear on some reader's screen. Nomenclature must be consistent. This came up in a previous talk. If the writer points out some feature in a diagram that's called a screw, it has to be screw everywhere in the text. Not sometimes screw, and other times bolt, and other times fastener. Should you have grid lines on a graph? Yes, if extracting numerical information is important. Then both vertical and horizontal grid lines should be displayed. And this means not using the Excel default, which is only horizontal grid lines. And if you have a feature that appears in several different figures, we should use consistent orientation and color so that the reader can quickly grasp that this is the same thing and not something different.
You have 1 minute left.
Oy, well, I think I'm going to shorten this talk very quickly to say that we've actually done some research to measure whether these best practices work or not. And the answer is they do. This is, for example, a result of a survey that we did with about 50, well, actually 150 respondents now, where we presented them with a graph in different versions. The graph is the same, but we labeled the features differently. And what we found by asking a question that asked them to extract information from that graph, that when the lines were directly labeled, it required the minimum of time, and more of them got the right answer. So, to summarize, we have to teach our students to craft figures to tell the scientific story. We should check that their presentation sentences allows reconstruction of the essential features of the figure. And we should teach them best practices, which includes heads-up display, consistent nomenclature, using a scale bar to indicate size, consistent orientation and color, etc., because they are the most effective and efficient. Thank you for your attention.
It was on time. Thank you very much for such an interesting study. And we are moving to the next presenter. Our next presenter is Dr. Einat Huberman, the head of the Research Authority at the Mofet Institute and a lecturer at the Hebrew University and the David Lin. And she will talk. Einat, are you here? Yes. And she will talk about learning about semiotic means during text production in early childhood.
Okay, so I really take you to the beginning, to early childhood education and about the ability to produce meaningful texts. So texts are semiotically coherent entities designed to communicate meaning to intended audience. And texts are made up of different meaning-making resources, mainly written language and graphic images. Each resource has its own affordances that are the characteristics that make it particularly suitable to represent certain types of meanings and inconvenient for other types of meanings. The aim of the current presentation is to present text production in situations in preschools that are opportunities to learn about meaning-making means and the affordances associated with each of them. And hopefully, if they are taught right, then they will come to the university already prepared to present their graphs better. So these are only partial results from 2 preschools where the teachers documented text production events. The teachers described the context of text production, transcribed children's conversations, photographed the texts the children produced, and added comments explaining some of the children's representations. The data analysis is based on genre markers, text functions, and also on Kress and Van Leuven's work on text layout and meanings. The first example I would like to bring is happened when the preschool children planted radish seeds and followed their development. One day, one of the children spotted a few uprooted plants in their garden and observed the leaves and the roots. And one of the children asked whether the roots were longer than the leaves or vice versa. And the teacher suggested to measure them and find out the answer. And what we see here are the measurements the children produced. So you can see the plant, the radish plant. There was some kind of ruler that helped the children measure the leaves and the roots. And as you can see from the first 2 representations, it's a little difficult to say what is longer and how long each leaf or root is. 2 children had more sophisticated ideas. They decided to represent the centimeters with circles, and here you can see the leaf, and here you can see the root. Okay, so if you count the number of circles, you can find how long the leaf is and how long the root. And this is the same method, but with different colors. But the children realized that it was very difficult for them to go back to the text and find out what their measurements were. At this point, the preschool teacher intervened and suggested to use a table. And she showed how to write one child's measurements, this first row. The length of the leaf is in this column, and the length of the root is in the left column. And after showing one child's measurements, the other children could easily fill in the table, thus realizing how easy it was to write the measurements in a table. And then by scanning the table, they learned about their tiny research projects. They had a research question, what was longer, then they had the observations, and then finally they have the bottom line that the roots were longer than the leaves. And that, of course, opened up another question: how come the roots are longer? What function do they serve? So in the right moment, when it was beneficial to their own objectives, the teacher could present the table format and help them use graphic means to present the contents in an efficient manner. The second example I'm going to give is drawing comparisons between countries. And this is a kindergarten that had visitors from the Netherlands and Mexico. The children wanted to prepare themselves to the guests and gather information about those countries. Each child was asked to bring one piece of information about the countries they were discussing. And this is the table the children produced. This was a group work. Nobody could produce it on his or her own. So
two more minutes, Nina, 2 more minutes.
Great. So we can see the countries here and the flag, a famous artist, flowers, a view, the landscape, food. And while producing these data, they learned what kind of meaning-making resource is suitable for each type of meaning. So in order to convey the flag, it is better to draw. But in order to have the artist's name, you need to write the name. Otherwise, it is very difficult to realize what the name is. And by looking at the rows, they realize what are the meaningful categories to describe countries. That's the fauna, the flora, the climate, the culture. So by looking at the rows, they have more abstract ideas about geographic categories. So while reading and producing texts, children are exposed to diverse knowledge domains, relevant vocabulary, and meaning-making resources. The texts they produced were multimodal, cohesive, and decontextualized. We could read them even without my explanations. And repeated experiences of text production and in meaningful situations nurture literacy skills and can provide firm basis for future studies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful work. We are moving to the last presentation, a poster, and all the three co-authors are from Ivan Jevakashvili, Tbilisi State University, Georgia. Also, they are members of the Erasmus and Asset Project. Dr. Isabella Petriashvili from Faculty of Psychology and Education Science, Dr. Ina Baratashvili, and Ms. Nino Chukovani.
Thank you for your introduction. So as we, three of us are here to present, we divided this 5-minute presentation among us, and I won't take much time and give floor to Ina. She will start, I will continue, and then Nino will end the presentation.
All right, once again, hello, and I'll start immediately, not to lose time. So our poster presentation is based on the assessment tools developed within the Erasmus Plus project Asset, namely assessment tools for new learning environments in higher education institutions. So Reflective Diary was one of the formative assessment tools developed within this project, and this tool was piloted in different courses, including ME programs at Ivan Jevakashvili State University, namely Reflective Diaries as an effective tool to enhance academic and non-academic writing was applied in the following courses. So the first course was MA program in English Philology within the course in English for academic purposes, so that is to say EAP course. Then MA teacher education program with ESL teacher specialization within the courses in using multimedia in ELT, and ESL teacher preparation certificate program within the course in methods of teaching the subject, which is English. And the language of instruction in all these courses is English. So due to COVID-19 lockdown, Tbilisi State University had to switch fully to online learning and teaching in a sort of emergency mode. And the swift transition, of course, required swift response in sense of adjusting teaching and learning styles and assessment approaches to radically change education reality. However, initial short-lived confusion has dispersed and sort of situation has settled more or less, and education process continued quite efficiently. It can even be claimed that in certain aspects it even turned out to be beneficial, because the focus was made on those aspects which more or less were ignored while having face-to-face classes. In particular, much more focus was made on written homework, assignments that in our case took the form of reflective diaries. At the Department of English Philology at our university, MA students were encouraged to submit their written responses to the assignments as feedbacks in form of reflective diaries. And I really wanted to prepare some of the samples, but again, these are also very interesting samples. So having heard other presentations, but unfortunately, again, I always had in mind this our limiting time. But anyway, so writing reflective diaries has been the part of another course, which is using multimedia and English language teaching, which used to be a blended course. So this so this semester, due to the aforementioned reason, it was done fully online, which increased the importance of reflective writing. However, apart from enhancing academic and non-academic writing, applying reflective diaries has multiple objectives, as Moon lists up to 18 purposes of reflective diaries, out of which the most relevant objectives pursued within the study was to explore how it affected writing, reflective thinking, understanding, learning, and developing, of course, critical thinking. Reflective diaries aim to express the observation of the learning process and evidence of reflection. Using reflective diaries as an assessment tool encourages students to reflect on their own learning and increase their meta skills so that they become aware of how they learn and even what they learn. The application of reflective diaries depends on subject and the aims of teaching and learnings. I think I was quite quick. Anyway, Dr. Isabella, I think she'll continue and she'll focus on this research part. Thank you.
Thank you. So the current presentation focuses on the experiences of using reflective diaries in order to improve writing, to enhance reflective practice, to support understanding and the representation of that understanding, and to develop critical thinking. The research objective of the study is to state the correlation between using reflective diaries as a formative assessment tool, including self-regulated learning, and enhancing academic and non-academic writing in MA programs at the postgraduate level at TSU. Qualitative research method was applied by using an online survey of students of the above programs as the research instrument. Based on the research objective, the research questions are: what is the impact of applying reflective diaries on enhancing students' academic and non-academic writing skills? And to what extent does it contribute to raising students' awareness of their learning experience?
Keep going.
So, sorry, what is it? Something, okay.
No, just it was a noise. You can continue.
Yeah.
Okay, so within Asset Project, the question bank has been created for writing reflective diaries, which is organized according to 3 dimensions: awareness of one's learning experiences. Students often do their study without knowing much about their current state of learning, for example, how they learn, why they learn, etc. Evaluation of the experience, that is, evaluation of the current state, identification of problems and recognition of the need for change, and regulation in attitude and behavior for better performance and more fruitful experience. Knowing how one is doing does not lead to improvement unless one is willing to make some adjustments accordingly. The first set, explore a learning experience, deals with the specific and the immediate. This helps improve students' performance. It focuses on cognition, behavior, and emotion. And in the table on the poster, you can see that there were questions asked in these 3 dimensions, like cognitive. What have I learned? Do I understand what I have learned? What can I do in order to gain a better understanding? In terms of behavior, how did I learn do it? How effective is my learning strategy?
Isabella, sorry, you have to finish.
Yes, so 1 more minute. And so actually, you can see the questions, and I'll give floor to Nino. Let her say a few words about conclusions.
Thank you so much. Greetings to you, very warm greetings. Well, I'll continue very briefly speaking about the research findings and conclusions. We have to.
Nino, but we have only 1 minute.
All right, I'll try to do
leave
my
some
best to
time for
accomplish.
questions, okay?
Exactly. So we've got the online survey questionnaire by Farah used in this survey for our students. And in the questionnaire, the students were indicating the extent of what they agreed with the following statements, like within the 5-point Likert scale. Okay, so they strongly agreed, disagreed, they disagreed. So, you know, they were neutral, they agreed, or they strongly agreed with it. So overall, there used to be 17 questions in the questionnaire, and approximately 60 students participated in it. So out of, we have to admit that it's kind of a positive feedback from the student side. Absolute majority were assessing the course and the tool like very fruitful and kind of noteworthy and worthwhile experience for them. So they used to express their, the respondents believed that they developed their and reinforced writing skills. They admitted that they enhanced the communication skills within this tool. They were very favorable and favorably thought that they were enhancing the reflective practice, etc. So let me just make a brief conclusion. We, as a team, would conclude and admit that overall they did develop their academic and non-academic writing skills, and furthermore, this all was reflected in their writing assignments and online discussions. So, general, the feedback used to be very positive and fruitful. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Brief as possible.
Thank you very much. I think we have some time for questions, and as far as I see, we have questions to about the poster. Did you give them specific questions for the reflective diaries?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, Mrs. Bella, please.
How did you transit? How did you transit from formative assessment to summative assessment? How did you grade this exercise?
Yeah. Oh, okay. You know, it is up to, it is not necessarily included in the summative, not always necessarily translated into summative. Summative assessment. Actually, the aim of the formative assessment is just to make assessment during the studies, just to improve their studies. So in each case, we 3 of us, we had different courses, different aims, and different criteria. So maybe you would like to add, Ina, something?
Maybe I will add, yes. So as I mentioned, I was planning to pilot this tool, definitely, but really this lockdown strongly encouraged me that in a way I didn't have way out. And it proved really extremely efficient in this situation. And I have to say that, of course, I had specific questions. Initially, I introduced my students to this form of reflective diaries, which you also called feedbacks and reflective diaries. And the thing is that I think it's really efficient in terms of being a formative tool, while not excluding final summative assessment. What happened is that we had this distribution of scores, like 15 for midterm and 25 for continuous assessment. which really turned into formative assessment, finally resulting in a score anyway, because we couldn't change the whole system. But the thing is that what happened is that one thing, the one drawback was that was really, I mean, quite sort of time, I wouldn't say time consuming, but it required a lot of time, but it was really interesting. When I was listening to Irene, I mean, we had the same examples, their approach, how it was not just dry response like writing answers 1A, 2B while doing reading comprehensions, but they were also sharing their emotions, their feelings, yes, exactly, and while working with, for example, idioms and phrasal verbs, they would come up with their own sketches, and that really, I mean, that showed us the potential. So much can be done even within the course that we've been doing for years and we've been used to, and even found them boring. So the thing is that I wouldn't say that it was completely formative assessment, because finally, personally, my course, I came up with this scores, but it was less sort of painful for students, because they realized why they had this assessment and that what they really deserved, and sort of they were more motivated and more involved and sort of more understanding, and not haggling for scores. For example, I want this and this, and this was sort of more friendly and understanding atmosphere that we had, and really efficient, I would say, in my case, and I think in case of Isabella and Nino as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions to the other speakers? No questions? Okay, I think we had a wonderful session, a very interesting, extremely interesting session. And we have some time to tour around Israel. You're all invited.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
so
Raya.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.